Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Kendra Speed and I am the Walker's Legacy Director for Austin. I'm delighted that everyone is here with us today, and I'm also happy to serve as your moderator for this session on breaking down the stigma with Tiffney Davidson-Parker. Would like to provide you just a little bit of background on Tiffney. She is the founder and owner of Universal Therapeutic Services. She's based in the upstate of South Carolina. She is a graduate of Howard University with a Master of Social Work and South Carolina State University with a Bachelor of Arts in Speech Pathology and Audiology. She is a licensed psychotherapist and has successfully organized, led, and managed community-based social services programs in the District of Columbia as well as in South Carolina. And these programs have met and exceeded operational and service delivery goals. One note here, I mentioned that Tiffney is a graduate of South Carolina State University. That is something that we have in common, and I'm super excited about being able to join with my fellow Bulldog today. She is an experienced healthcare administrator, a visionary leader, and an advocate for underserved and underinsured individuals in need of mental and behavioral healthcare services. She has a solution-focused approach in her call to serve communities and families. In talking about families, she is the wife of Coach Clarence Parker, who is the founder and owner of Health and Fitness Alliance, and also the mother of two sons, Davidson and Michael Parker. And she refers to them as her superheroes. She is committed to leaving a legacy of love and financial independence for her family as she serves God, families, and communities. Welcome, Tiffney. We thank you so much for being here today. Please go ahead and provide us with a little bit of introduction of yourself.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It is simply an honor to be here today and to serve in this capacity. You're right, Kendra. Everything you said is true about just, the background and all that. But the reason why I serve in this way is it is a calling. And so it resonated so much with what Shanti mentioned about being called in the field of mental and behavioral health care to break down the stigma, to bring healing. Honestly, I didn't want to be a social worker, let alone a therapist, but God said otherwise. So when he directs your path, you go and you follow and you serve accordingly. And so here we are now today in 2020 as an owner of a company that's providing mental health services to, we've touched over 300 lives in 2 years. We're seeing outcomes and we're seeing people actually being healed and coming to services. We're breaking down the barriers by serving people who are Spanish speaking, Asian Pacific Islanders, African Americans, and Caucasians. So we are serving the gamut, hence Universal Therapeutic Services.
Thank you. So when you mention like the wide spectrum of individuals that you're serving, that then puts me in mind of thinking about how are you armed to be able to speak to the context of each of those patients as you're bringing and serving them each day.
Yeah, and that leads me to our discussion today, right? In order to do that, we have to be culturally competent. But even before we become culturally competent, there's certain prerequisites that come along with that. And so I want to frame today what that means. So one, we have to understand what is culture, right? What's another catchphrase that you'll hear talked about around cultural competence? You got to know what race means. What does it mean? Right? And then also understanding, what does ethnicity mean? Some of these words are just thrown around interchangeably. So culture is simply a set of beliefs, core values, things that people live by that help them organize the world around them and their life, themselves, right? How they identify race. Sometimes we identify that with how someone looks, their aesthetics, their skin tone, maybe even their biological background. Are they connected to Jamaican descendants or, that kind of thing. And so when we think about race, right? But then ethnicity is belonging, right? So what cultural group do you belong with? Right? Who do you identify with? Right? And so understanding those definitions around that, one, helps us begin to understand culturally the people that we're serving, and then to have a level of cultural sensitivity, cultural awareness, as well as cultural competence. And so when we think about those terms, that then, we ask, okay, so what does that mean? What does cultural awareness mean? And you guys feel free to text and chat in the checkbox about what your thoughts are around cultural awareness, and then cultural sensitivity and cultural competence. But it all begins with having a cultural knowledge, a cultural understanding of someone who may come from an Asian or Pacific Islander background, right? And so today we're going to focus primarily on those cultural groups that the census identifies, such as African and Black Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans, Hispanic and Latinos, and then white Americans. And so when we think about being culturally competent and culturally aware and culturally sensitive to those categories, we have to know that cultural awareness is simply just having an open mind, right? Being open-minded to the viewpoint and understanding that it's okay, one, that there's other cultures around me, and that they can be who they are, how they are, live freely to be who they are within their culture that they have then defined and adopted for themselves. But then being culturally sensitive leads us to the notion of saying, okay, I see you, I understand you, and I respect you. I respect you for who you are, right? And we can be together while being different. We don't have to be the same to get along. And that right there, that'll lead to a whole nother discussion, Kendra, right?
Right. Well, I'm thinking about, so when you said awareness, I'm like, okay, I feel like cultural awareness seems like something that a lot of people are aware of culture. And I think the sensitivity is really important. It's saying, like, how do we get beyond just being aware of the differences by culture, and then really being able to delve in and be able to understand the value in that. And I don't know if that's sensitivity or if that goes a step further.
So that goes that next step further. So when we talk about cultural competence, then you're taking your awareness, right? You're knowing of other cultures. You're taking then your sensitivities of saying, okay, well, I'll be mindful to maybe not use this type of vernacular, or watch my tone when I communicate. I'm going to use certain words to try to better understand the communication and the environment around me. But I'm also going to implement my skills. So now you're using it, you're working it, you're operating in that level of competence and saying, okay, I'm competent enough to have a great relationship with someone who comes from a Latino or Hispanic background, right? I'm competent enough to understand that someone along the Asian Pacific Islander background has different values than what I have. And that's okay, and I can respect that. And so I wanted to really give some framing around those definitions so that way we're all on the same page.
Yeah, and one thing, and just talking to people both on Facebook and then also here on the Zoom, is that we want to encourage engagement here. As Tiffany and I talked in preparation for this, she was really talking about the engagement and wanting to hear the talk back via chat. So please chime in with any perspective that you might have as we go along. Really interesting as you break down the definitions for us. I'm interested in how an individual delves into this. Like, how do you get to this place of cultural competence? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question, Kendra. Getting to this place, one, becomes with, we get there by exposing ourselves, simply. By exposing ourselves openly, being judgment-free, and saying, okay, I'm going to interact with the world and the environment around me with a global mindset, so that not only can I be received, but I can receive others too. So we have to self-evaluate to identify our own culture. Where do we fit in? Who are we identifying ourselves with? And from that, what are our sensitivities? What are our cultural biases that we carry knowingly and unknowingly? right? And so taking those things into the room. And so, when we think about all the populations of diversity, from nationality, ethnicity, from languages, gender, race, sexuality, the list can go on with these different groups of diversity, right? So we have to go in and saying, okay, well, yeah, I'm a 40-year-old woman, plus a year or two, right? And I come from, right, the African-American background. Okay, but I'm serving people, or even not just serving people with therapy, but I'm working with people. I'm in the community with people. I'm going to church with people who may not look exactly like me, may not think exactly like me, may not have the same socioeconomic status as I do, and that's okay, right? Because what we value has a lot to do with how great our relationships can become with one another. So if we're valuing those things that are material, if we're valuing what it looks like on the outside, then that can limit our relationships. It can limit healing. It can limit transparency, and totally aid to this ongoing stigma that we're dealing with right now.
I'm really interested, like it kind of sparked to that thought about like what we value. Mm-hmm. And talk to me a little bit about that, how that comes into your work, how it comes into the relationships as you seek to kind of grow the relationships and working through, barriers that may exist based upon what differences in values.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So from a clinical perspective, my value is making sure that person gets the most out of engaging with me, right? And that I get the most out of engaging with them. So listening, valuing their words, valuing their experience, not discounting the trauma that they may have gone through, or not discounting their emotions of anger or hurt or frustration that they identify with every single day. And so it does come down to being sensitive to that person, just listening to them, having an open eye and an open heart to really hear from them and receive them. Yeah.
So as you talk about, there's a continuum of mm-hmm. cultural competence. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is, and how do we evaluate where we might be at any given time along that continuum?
That's good. Now, this continuum goes through about, 5 different stages. And with the continuum, we think about where someone currently is based on their understanding of culture, based on how they interact. So you have cultural incapacity is a level. Cultural blindness is another level. But then that very first level, cultural destructiveness. Now, when we think of cultural destructiveness, that's someone whose viewpoint is closed. They're speaking down about anything that's not like them, that doesn't reflect who they are. They are totally just closed. If they can't relate to it, then they're out to destruct and tear down all other cultures, right? So that's that far end of the spectrum. Okay. Then we think of cultural incapacity, and this continuum was coined by a great mentor of mine. I just want to say this, Dr. Marisa Isaacs, who's now deceased, Barbara Bazron, also, who is now the director of DC Department of Mental Health, and they really poured a lot into me as I grew through learning from them around this continuum. And so you got cultural destructiveness, cultural incapacity, where someone they're trying, but they don't have the capacity to really understand, because they haven't opened their mindset. They haven't begun to accept other norms. They haven't started to really assess themselves, along this continuum. And then cultural blindness, we're all the same. It's just all homogenous. We're one big melting pot. There's nothing different. We're people, and that's it. Right? So that's being culturally blind. And that's an area where we don't want to be, of course, right? We want to be culturally respectful of one another and understand that we do have differences and we have similarities, and that's all okay. But when we get to that part of the continuum that talks about cultural precompetence, where you start to open up yourself and say, okay, you know what? I realized that when I met or had lunch with, you could say a client or a friend who may, or a soon-to-be friend who may be Asian Pacific Islander, and I couldn't relate and I didn't understand. So I want to learn more about the Mandarin language or the culture in Vietnam, or I want to learn more about the West Indian culture. I want to learn more about it. So now you have this urge and this desire to chew on the facts and the knowledge of a culture, whether it be how they live, how they walk, how they talk, the things that they've gone through, right? Their struggles as a group, as a people, and then that final phase is when we have started to learn, not only start to learn, but now we're adopting those things to where we can engage with someone with respect, with even, use of language, how we interact with them, and we're proficient in doing so. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, so we have some engagement on the chat. I do have one question. Like, is it possible that as you think about the cultural continuum, that we could move along that continuum? So I think about, like, this week has been a rough week, in addition to everything that we've been going through with being in our homes for the last 2.5 months. And as I think about this, I would love to think that I operate in this cultural competence the majority of the time, but I can see, sometimes reverting is what I would call it, reverting back. Is that a concept in that, or how do you think about points in time, falling in different places on that continuum?
And that is good because, one season of your life or around one event, we can be very culturally competent and we can understand what someone's going through regarding genocide, right? And we can relate to it and just have this heart of empathy but then when we're dealing with, right now with all these, deaths and folks who are just being senselessly murdered right before our eyes, there's a level of some of us who are like, no, I can't accept this. This is not culturally appropriate. This is, I don't want to say that this is okay. I'm not going to down it down, and subscribe to this notion of treatment. Right. And so yes, we can go through a continuum of supporting it and being for whatever that event is that we can relate to. But then there's going to be times where we don't understand it and we don't get it. And why is it happening? And I know our topic today is dealing with mental health in this aspect, but racism is here on the rise. Right. And so even within there's a culture. People who happen to be racist, that's a culture, right? And so there's so many people who will not be able to understand why is someone racist? What is it that's causing them to be this way and to treat individuals not like them this way, right? And so how do we get to this place of being more, open to discuss these things in a way, in a manner that's going to bring about the necessary change that we require and that we need. Yeah.
There seems to be a great need for this type of capability and these structures to be able to open up the conversation and also have us grow. I want to go to some of the observations here from the chat. So, Javon says, culture is forever changing and reflecting what's happening in society. It can be born of arts, music, food, and sometimes politics and strife. So talking about like the different dimensions of culture and how that shows up. Do you have a reaction to that as we think about culture being ever evolving?
Yeah. And so because culture is ever evolving, with all, Gen X and all these levels of generations and Gen Y and the cultures that each one of these generations come along with, it brings about a whole nother level of acceptance, right? When we think about the baby boomers, that was a whole nother culture in and of itself. How they operated, how they worked, how they thrived, right? And now in the face of this pandemic, we have babies that are being born right? We have youngsters who are graduating from high school and going into college. And so they're entering into a whole nother time continuum that is shifting our culture globally. Right? So the things where we would normally go to graduations and have all these parties. So now our ceremonies and all these things that we identified as a part of our culture are changing and shifting. And so how we change and shift in that, it matters. It matters in a way regarding our mental health and our mental wellness. So that, you know, being open to the change, being open to the shifts, you know, we can't ever be so stuck and stagnant in our own ways that we're not open to change and shift. Otherwise, that will increase more stress, increase more anxiety, increase depression, you know, and those things that lend to increased mental health concerns. And so, yeah.
Talk to us a little bit more about that. Like, how does cultural competence show up in the mental health space? And how do you leverage that as a model within that space? And how can we, you know, benefit from that as we think about our own mental wellness?
Yeah. So when we are culturally competent, we are using linguistically appropriate language, right? We're not, oh, well, you know, they're crazy. You know, oh, I mean, well, you know, he's been acting that way for a long time. And so the whole family is just crazy. They just fool up. You know, we're from the South. And so we hear this vernacular, we hear this language. And so as a clinician, of course, we steer clear from that type of communication. But here in the community, how do we then push the charge with people to you know, break down that language so that is more pleasing and more accepting and more suitable for what's actually going on around them, you know? And I think that comes with education, right? Educating our community and sharing with them that, you know, these are the signs and the symptoms that you can look for regarding depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, or even eating disorders, you know? And so showing up clinically, showing up as a professional is, you know, being able to educate, being able to share, hey guys, you know what, think about what you just said. How would you feel if somebody called you that, you know? And so making those adjustments and corrections amongst your peer groups, you know, in a way that they'll accept it. You know your people, you know, so you know how you can talk to them and share that with them. In addition to that, you know, we have to evaluate ourselves. We have to evaluate ourselves and again, check our biases at the door and say, okay, now am I too being biased and not being culturally sensitive or aware of this group or this situation? You know, we have to develop goals, you know, to implement. So for instance, if you're a business owner, then you might say, okay, you know what, I'm looking at my business structure or the staffing and everybody looks just like me, whether it be white, black, Latina, whomever. Well, what do I need to do as a business to bring in more diversity upon my team? You know, what can I do to celebrate the diversity on my team? What can I do in my community to have more initiatives that celebrate different cultures? And, you know, of course, you have the festivals and things that happen in larger cities and things like that. But even in a small community, even in a rural town, what can we do to let people know that their culture is accepted, you know? And we can do that by educating, outreaching, letting people know that, you know what, it's okay to be different and we can be together. You know, it's okay to be. So I hope that answered that question, Kendra.
Yes. Another question that we have here is around, you know, right now our police seem to need cultural competency training.
Mm-hmm.
There also seems to show that there might be some mental health concerns associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
What can Black folks do to get governments to see the value of cultural competency for the helpers in our community?
That's a good question. And so what can we do as a community? We can speak up first. So when we notice, let's say that the police force is predominantly populated by one race, one ethnicity, one group of culture, so to speak, then we can say, hey, we need to have more officers that reflect this community, right? And so, going and talking to them and writing the letters and sharing, not only that, we can apply for the jobs, right? And so when we want to see this culture, then if you want to see the change, then you got to go out there and you have to be the change. So we can't expect to say, oh, change this, and you need to do this, and you need to do that, when we're not taking it upon ourselves to go out and be that change, to apply for these jobs where we can then bring in this cultural diversity. Yes, you may be that 1 in 8. Okay, but be that one. And let your voice be heard. And so I think that's one way. And regarding other government entities and getting the word out about the need for cultural diversity and cultural competence, and even training our officers, if you're a nonprofit, host an event and invite them out. If you're doing outreach in the community, make sure that you include them in it, and say, hey, I have this training. I would like to share this information with your team. So setting that up and just really reaching out outside of your typical box, think outside the box.
Okay, I'm just doing a couple of checks to see if.
Yeah. But, while we're waiting, if we look back over the past 50 years, right? Our nation has gone through just a continuum, a whole array of changes along cultural competence, cultural awareness, and then, cultural sensitivity. Back in the 1950s, the lingo was the melting pot. Again, we're all together, this melting pot. In the 60s, it came to, okay, cultural awareness, and now we're thinking and realizing, oh, there's other cultures around us. Who would have thought? Who would have known? In the 70s, you have the civil rights movement. Right. And so people were forced to recognize and take action. You had the voters' rights movement in the 70s. So then we were making a point to be seen, to be heard, to be understood. In the 80s, now we're looking at these cultural pluralisms, where, beginning to accept different cultures and where we can be together and commuting together. And people were being empowered to identify with their identity. The 90s, okay, that's our time, right? In South Carolina State, the 90s, we're hearing all these different variables about age and sex and, sexism, ageism, racism, and all these different isms are starting to be identified, right? But that was good because it was bringing out the fact that there's differences in the midst of all these similarities, and then here now, the early 2000s, we're bringing about this ethno-cultural, looking at ethnicity and culturalism and bringing that thing together and really starting to get a grasp of what does it look like to be culturally competent? What does it feel like to be culturally competent? Now, this thing is mandated that is taught in schools of social work. It's mandated that it's in policies for agencies and for government entities. Now, it's mandated, but that doesn't mean that it's always a level of accountability, right? Yeah. And so that's where we as a people can then hold these government entities accountable of saying, okay, well, let me check your staff, and your policy says that you have a wide open acceptance of no matter who you hire. Do you have somebody there that's handicapped or disabled? Do you have someone there that's from a different country or different language background? Do you have women and men in leadership? And so it ranges over such a wide span of things that we can't just limit it to racism, because it's not just that. There's so many classes of diversity that we have to think about. And when we think about the changes that we've taken since 50 years ago, 1950s to now, and even with those changes, we're still dealing with the same things that were being dealt with in the 70s and the 60s, right? Somebody said, but now it's just being televised. So all of that impacts our mental well-being. All of that has weight on who we are as a people, and being fearful of walking out the door and thinking that, oh, if I ride my bike too long, well, what's going to happen? Am I in the right neighborhood, right? And so there is no way today that we should be dealing with those issues. So we have to fight this thing, but my notion is we got to fight it with love too. We have to. And we have to be heard. We have to use our voice. We have to, be present and stand up and speak up when these things are happening in our community. It's fine to post a video and post a comment on Facebook, but what are you really doing out there in the community? Who are you really serving? Or are you just sitting in your living room saying, this y'all ain't right, and posting a comment? But are you taking action? Are you going to the government entities and saying, hey, look, enough is enough? Right? And until you hire people that look like us, they can't serve us. Right? The whole notion of nothing about us without us. Right? And so if the whole police officer beat is a whole bunch of white men, Anglo-Saxon men, who are going into a Black community, well, what does that look like? That's already a perceived threat. And so I can go on and get on my soapbox, but I really believe that, in order for us to break down this stigma with mental health, yes, we have to continue educating. We have to be a voice. We have to let our piece be heard in a way that is passionate, in a way that's authentic, in a way that's transparent. We have to share our stories. We can't walk around just like Shanti. Shanti got on, Natalie got on and said, hey, I've gone through depression. I've gone through anxiety. Guess what? I have too. I've gone through my own depression, through a major divorce and life hit hard, And so when we can stand up and speak about that thing, and people understand that, oh my gosh, you've gone through that too, and now look at you. We don't have to stay hurt. We don't have to stay in a place of mental anguish. And what I always like to say is, we can't stay with dis-ease, because dis-ease will bring disease.
Right.
And so if we are constantly with this emotional dis-ease that we don't deal with, that we don't address, and we just keep stuffing it and packing it and stuffing it, because Black men are supposed to be strong. They're not supposed to talk, cry, laugh, right? They're supposed to, this machoism. Black women, we're always angry and loud, right? So who's listening? I mean, these are all these stereotypes that go out there that talk about, Black women, they don't need any mental health because they're too strong. They're strong anyway, right? But we do need it. And we need to be able to seek it. And we need to be able to be authentic about it. Black men need it. Asian Pacific Island need it. Native Americans need it. White Americans need it. And so when we think about this continuum of need and diversity, the only way that we can break the stigma is if we first admit to the need, first admit to our own issues, and be open about it and saying, hey, you know what? I really was feeling kind of down the other day, and this is what it looked like for me, or reaching out to your support system, and saying, hey guys, today I'm having a challenging day. I need you just to cover me for a moment. Can you cover me? And having people who understand you and see you for who you are so that you can be. One of the words that have really been resonating me during this season is just the blessing to be. Mm-hmm. How blessed we are to be, right? We're blessed to be living right now. We're blessed to be Black. We're blessed to be whatever race and culture that we are. And not only that, but we're blessed to walk in our authenticity and be that. And in the face of this crisis, as we are able to be, we are becoming greater. We are becoming stronger. We are becoming more resilient. We are becoming better and greater than we can ever even imagine. And so when we go forth and be authentic in that, and be open to share, our cultural sensitivities and our cultural biases, and ask the questions to gain understanding, do the research, then we can start to heal. Then we can start to recover. Then we can start to see a way through what may seem like gloom and doom. But I know that there's a way that we're going to get through this. I know that. I know it, And so I just challenge everybody to think about, you know, where are you on this continuum of cultural competence? And we talked about being culturally destructive. Are you destroying your culture or your own or other people's, right? Because people can also destroy their own cultures.
Wow.
And bring shame to their own cultures, right? Based on how they are responding to the world around them. So are we being culturally destructive? Are we tapping in to truly be authentic and not be what it looks like? You know, everybody on Facebook got a show nowadays.
You're right.
Everybody on Facebook has a show. Everybody want to be famous, okay? But are you being your authentic self? Right? Are you opening up yourself to have greater capacity around being culturally savvy, being culturally aware, being culturally astute? Are you changing your vernacular? Are you still walking around defaming sisters and brothers?
Well, and Tiffney, one thing that really resonated with me as you were speaking was, you know, this whole being, you know, just to be and being authentic. I think back to a post I saw earlier today with someone I worked with throughout my career, and she was saying something like, I really wish I didn't have to go to work today. I don't feel like code switching. I don't feel like going and put on a smile. And my thing to her was like, go and be you, like go in and actually be honest with the feeling. When they say, how are you? Be a bit vulnerable in opening that a bit, because I think one, it's in the acknowledgement, and then two, it's in people being able to hear this, because they'll be like, well, Natalie, or this person was fine coming back in to work today. You know, there's no problem. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that we get to the point of being okay with being somewhat vulnerable, mm-hmm. and knowing that that's okay, and we'll live through that.
That's right.
And being able to, you know, reveal more of ourselves.
That's right. That's right. And that's so true. You know, whether it be with your set of friends or your coworkers, you know, your spirit church, wherever you are. And when we're pinned up and bottled up, and we have this mask that presents everybody before we actually get into the room, right? Then who are you really lying to? Who are you really lying to? You're not lying to them, you're lying to yourself.
Right.
Right. And so it takes a courage to say, you know what, I'm here today, guys, but I'm having a challenging day. Can you just give me a moment? You know? And then what does that do? Hopefully the people around you care enough to come back and check in. Right. But when we don't share, when we're not vulnerable, when we're not authentic, that's what then begins the loneliness. Oh, well, they ain't even asked me how I'm doing today, because every time you come in, you say you're fine. Every time you come in, you acting like everything's okay, and you got this chip on your shoulder, so nobody really, you're okay, but you don't act okay. So you're sending mixed signals, but you want folks to check on you. I mean, right, right? So we have to be open enough to say, okay, you know what? I'm having a challenging day. I do want to talk about it at some point, but I'm not sure when or who I'll talk about it with. You know, but just give me a moment. And then I guarantee people will begin to respond to that person in a different way, you know, because they're going to start to see, okay, well, I had a rough day yesterday. I get it. I understand. Have your time, have your moment, you know, so that's good. Yeah. Yeah.
So there was a question here that talks about, how can we help someone who is clearly struggling with depression or severe grief and refuses to acknowledge and name their struggle in order to actively cope with it in the safest or healthiest ways?
Yes, Mia, thank you for that question. Or Destiny, yeah. So one thing is, you know, we have to meet people where they are, and that person has to be ready to openly discuss and share. You know, not sure about the relationship that you have with that person, and it's clear, it may just be a point to where you say, hey, you have that conversation, kind of like Shanti said, you take the honest, right? Instead of you saying, oh, you sure look sad today. Oh, what's wrong with you? I don't know. Why do you look so sad? What's wrong? Are you sad? And if they're not going to talk about it to you, they're not going to talk about it. But I guarantee if you go to that person, you say, man, yesterday or last week, I just had a moment. And you start to open up. Even if they don't open up immediately, they'll start to think and they'll start to ponder on that, and then by you sharing, you can ask them, so have you ever felt like that? So one approach I like to do is feel, felt, found. Okay. So feel, felt, found. Let's say you're having a discussion with someone, and now hopefully you may see them and you say, gosh, how are you feeling today? They might say, yeah, I understand how you feel. I felt that way before too. And what I found is when I talk to somebody about it, it's not such of a heavy weight on me. Feel, felt, found. I understand how you feel. So people want to know that you understand them, right? And then they want to know that you relate. I feel that way. I felt that way too. I felt that way. When and you tell your story. But what I found, now you got a solution. But what I found is when I talked to my therapist, or what I found is when I journaled, or what I found is when I went in my prayer closet, or what I found is when I didn't eat all those sweets, or what I found is, right? So when you share your strategy for solution, then that's when you can help move that person, hopefully, to speaking about it and talking about it. But again, we start with people where they are. And for that person who's dealing with severe depression, it may just be, hey, sir or ma'am, let's go out for a second, or can I call you? Or, just making sure you're constantly engaging with them, right? Because one thing I'm gonna tell you, somebody who's dealing with depression, they really don't want to be alone. They really don't, right? They really want somebody who's going to stick in with them and check in on them and follow up with them. And so do that, follow up, check in, share your stories, share maybe how you may have coped or someone else has coped. Yeah.
What resonates with what you just talked about is, this whole empathic connection, and being able to connect there, and saying, we're not looking down on anyone. We're getting there on that level,
yes,
understanding, relating, and then also pointing to a way forward.
That's right. And that's what it's about. As a therapist, the best therapist and just even friendships and relationships is when there's not this hierarchy, I'm here and you're here, right? But it's when it's parallel and each person, because you think about it, Kendra, I'm sure you have girlfriends to where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't mind sharing with her because she shares equally with me. I don't mind divulging my stuff because they're going to keep it. They're going to cover me. They're going to talk me through it. And they're going to even help me identify some solutions to get out of it. Right? And so those are those types of relationships that we need to break this stigma of mental illness, and to promote mental health, right? To promote mental health and mental well-being. Yes. Okay. Absolutely.
So, Tiffney, I would like to welcome you to have any closing thoughts that you might have for the group before we wrap up today.
Yes. it is important that we take action. Especially now. So I challenge you today to take action on what can you do to promote cultural competence, cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity, right? That then ultimately lends to use of skill sets to communicate better with the world around you. What can you do today? Right? What can you do today? I know we're still social distancing, but there's still something that you can do today. If you're part of an organization, what can you do to share something about your culture? Or what can you do to learn more about your own culture? Because a lot of us are culturally blind still yet. So the charge is, what can you do to take action today. Not just sit in on this beautiful webinar with us, a summit, and walk away feeling good and warm and fuzzy, but take it and apply this information. Use it to improve your life and those around you.
Tiffney, also, do you have any information for us about how we can continue to stay in touch with you?
Absolutely. We are at www.universaltherapeuticservices.com. We are on Facebook under Universal Therapeutic Services, on LinkedIn, and as well as Instagram on Universal Therapeutic Services. I can be called at 864-540-1209 without an issue. And we're here to serve. We're available. Again, we have an eclectic team of therapists. We serve in the upstate and working into the low country. We just started case management services and psychotherapy. We're doing those two right now. And so as we grow to serve, we want you to grow as you grow to serve as well. So thank you.
Yeah, special thanks to you, Tiffney Davidson-Parker. This has been a great discussion. The work that you're doing is greatly needed and appreciated by myself and I'm sure the community. So we'll take, I'll call it an 8-minute break and invite back our DJ, C. Devon, before we begin our next session. So thank you so much. Please stick around. It continues.